Hello everyone, I'm Nayaswami Asha. We're continuing our study of the essence of self-realization, the wisdom of Paramhansa Yogananda. It's been about 15 years now, at least, that I've been doing these book study courses based on Master's writings, Swami's books. We studied once God Alone by Sister Gyanamata. It's really a very extremely rich and satisfying way to share the teachings. I started doing it because I felt that these books were all so deep that I myself was at times struggling to understand or amazed by the levels of meaning that were revealed. And I just never tire of doing it. I've got several running in different spheres right now. If you go on the Nayaswami Asha YouTube site, you'll see the Swamiji's commentary on the Gita, Swamiji's commentary on the Patanjali courses are the active ones right now. If you look at that site, and also if you go to the Ananda Palo Alto site, you'll also see many of the books that I've done that were done as MP3s, just as audio, before we had the video capability we have now. Anyway, I was particularly enjoying it, and I just wanted to share my enjoyment with you again. We're up to chapter 13, and last week the chapter we did was the need for yoga. And keep going it backwards here. Let's see, the need for yoga, that's right. What is yoga? Why do we need it? And now this is the highway to the infinite, this is called, and it's comparatively speaking a short chapter. There's only 5 entries here, but it perhaps is the most picking it up by the right string chapter, I want to say, in all of Master's writings, but of course that's an absurdly grand statement. But what he's answering here is something that is both urgent and also dear to many people's heart, which is how are we ever going to get ourselves past this religious sectarianism? In the autobiography of a yogi, it specifically mentions that when Jesus appeared to Babaji to launch what is really, what became Yogananda's incarnation, to bring self-realization first to the West and then to the whole world, it spoke of the fact how Babaji and Jesus are conscious of the development of the modern world and are deeply concerned about a few, excuse me, I'm going to have to sneeze. Sorry. And are particularly confused about a few things that they saw as so profoundly detrimental. And one of them is race prejudice, and the other is religious sectarianism, in which people become, because people do things in the name of religion, that common sense and common decency would prevent them from doing it any other time. And that's really where we are now. And there's a certain movement that's been going on for a while, which you might call it an ecumenical movement. And people get together, even in the local town that I live in. There's a ministers' association, and our Sangha's not as active in it as we were at one time, but a ministers' association where the clergy people from all the different, many of the different groups, Jewish and I don't know if there's a Hindu representative. I think they consider me to represent India, although I represent self-realization, which is not the same as any recognized religion at this time. But many different denominations come together. And we all like each other. Everyone who's given their life to this profession, many of the people who've given their lives to these professions are very fine people. And you enjoy their company, and jokingly, if you wanted to say if you were going to be stuck on a desert island with someone, these are the people that you'd like to be stuck with, or trapped in a lifeboat. I mean, these are quality human beings with profound and good values. But the effort to find actual unity among our points of view, it's painfully polite, because everyone wants to be tolerant, everyone wants to be respectful, but the truth of the matter is we're all following the path we're following because we like it. And on some level, we think it's the best. Whether we think that means it's better than is a whole different question, but it's certainly the best for me. Given my aspirations and my goals, this one suits me. And I feel like people want to be closer than that. They want it to be more than just polite tolerance and, oh, isn't that interesting? And in our church, we do this kind of energy, where there really could be a sense that we're all on the same path. But Swamiji wrote this up in a book called The Hindu Way of Awakening, is what he called it. And he used Hinduism as the model for a universal principle he wanted to put across, which was that every faith has its outer form of rituals and beliefs, and it has the inner way of awakening. And the way of awakening is where true religions, and I say true religions, by that I mean those who conform to the way that we're made, that reflect Sanatana Dharma, that aren't man-made, but are a revelation from a self-realized master. That's where all such religions that are the, at least in their origin point, quite apart from what they've degenerated into, but in their origin point, were an actual revelation of divine reality that then subsequently gets turned into the way of belief. And the way of belief is, we have the wine and the bread, and it represents the body and the blood of Jesus Christ who died on the cross for us. Or we have the pujari who puts the ghee and the rice into the fire and says the Sanskrit mantras in just this certain way. Or we have the Jews who don't have any images in their temple and, celebrate the traditions in the way that they have them, and that they never get together. The Jews never talk about Jesus, and the Christians only talk about Jesus, and the Hindus talk about everybody. You'll never get together on that level. So here Master is talking about what he calls the true highway to the infinite, because one of the expressions that Master often quoted was, truth is one, the paths to it are many. And most of the time when people say that, they're speaking of the religions. But really it needs to be spoken that truth is one, but the path to it is multifarious, if that's an actual word, multitudinous. I think multifarious means something else, but I won't stop now. I'll look it up later. Multitudinous as there are individuals. Because, as Master explains to us, the highway to the infinite is the spine. It's where the energy flows in the spine. And everything else is extra. And in many ways, everything else is superfluous. You could have no religions, you could have no churches, no temples, no sanghas, no nothing, and you would still have the highway to the infinite. It would still be possible for every human being who desired strongly enough to unify their individual consciousness with a greater reality. They would all eventually get there. Someone was once asked, or reputed to ask, because I don't know the origin of this story, but someone was reputed to have asked Master Yoganandaji, if you were on a desert island and could only have one of the techniques that you've taught, what would it be? Everyone assumed he would say Kriya, the technique of Kriya being the beginning of the culmination, the initiation which culminates your path toward dedication, and then you reach the point of Kriya initiation. But he is said to have said the energization exercises, because he said, if you practice the energization exercises, you will discover all the rest of the techniques. Now, whether true or apocryphal, it's certainly interesting, isn't it? Because what he's saying is that once you begin to concentrate inwardly and become aware of the energy flow within your own first physical and then more subtle astral and causal bodies, then it will lead you. It will lead you inevitably, because there is no other place that you could possibly go. There's a chant that we sometimes sing that was said to be one of Sri Yukteswar's favorite chants. And one of the lines in it is, "Pranayama be thy religion. Pranayama will give thee salvation." It's sort of fun when you sing it, because the word seems a little, it's not that poetic when it comes into the verse. Pranayam be thou religion, pranayam will give thee salvation. But it's presenting, as I was starting to say, the central truth of the entire path of self-realization. Prana means energy. It's sometimes described as breath, but breath is just a manifestation of the energy within us, the life force. Prana is the life force. Yama means control of the life force. And what those lines in that song are saying, pranayama be thy religion, meaning forget that you were a Hindu or a Muslim or a Jew or whatever you were, just forget it. All of that is to awaken us to the possibility of actually transforming our consciousness. And the reason that Master made the energization exercises so key is because energization exercises are about pranayama. They are about controlling the life force, first by physical means, but the mistake people make when they first learn the energization exercises, and if you don't know them, if you contact Ananda anywhere, they're very easy. It's very easy to get access to instruction. I believe actually they're even included in Jyotish's book, How to Meditate. And there's an iPhone app, or a phone app, that will guide you through the practices. In other words, low tech, high tech, or medium tech, you can find a way to get to the energization exercises. But the energization exercises, because they look physical when you're watching someone do it. He's puffing and he's moving and he's lifting his arms and moving his legs and so on like that. You may actually think that it's either calisthenics or aerobics or something like that. And sometimes those who practice it miss the point. That's one of Patanjali's warnings on the spiritual path, missing the point. But what energization really is about is using the concentration and willpower to gain mastery over the life force. And of course, where we experience it first and primarily is in our own bodies. And energization exercises, by the steady and regular practice, you begin to gain mastery over the life force. And that's pranayam. Pranayam be thou thy religion. And pranayam, control of the life force, will give you salvation. Now, isn't that interesting? And here's how Master explains it very simply. The physical body is a vehicle for consciousness. It's not, the brain does not create consciousness. Consciousness creates the brain. This is what science is discussing these days, but I'm just going to present these things as facts because I just simply don't have the heart to argue them one way or another. But Master explains it this way. He says, when the sperm and ovum unite in that first cell, that's the medulla. And the medulla is the seat of ego consciousness in the body. And the way Master's subtle definition of ego is that the infinite spirit has become identified with the physical form that it's animating at this particular point. And that happens at the medulla. The sperm and ovum come together, and the life force in the form of a jiva, an individual, enters in to that combined cell, and that's the beginning of the physical body. And then with the inherent intelligence and the blueprint created by the chakras from the previous incarnations, which the chakras are the blueprint of the karma, then from that single cell, the life force projects itself into the material world, using its divine magnetism to gather together the atoms that are required gradually to construct this physical body. And that physical body is made, according to the blueprint in the chakras, to be the vehicle for the expression and the experience of the karma that soul needs, that jiva needs, for its unlearned lessons. I was contemplating, and I'm going to try not to lose my place here, but I was thinking about this. I do another webinar series, which everything ends up posted on the YouTube channel, but I'm recording that one, in theory at least, for an Indian audience. I do it at a time of day that's convenient for the Indian audience, and I've commented more than once in that webinar about the mistaken attitude that many Indian people have toward the concept of karma, in which karma becomes passive. And the idea, oh, it's my karma, becomes a passive concept. Well, and often it's spoken with a collapsing of the shoulders and a downward movement of the tone of voice. Oh, it's just my karma, like that, meaning I have to endure it, I can't do anything about it. But oftentimes in the West, when I'm trying to explain what karma is, I've substituted the words unlearned lessons. Karma is unlearned lessons. And the ultimate lesson we're trying to learn is that we are children of the divine, and all the fulfillment we're seeking will be found in unity with the divine, and every other path that we're following is just a cul-de-sac that is never going to give us what we're seeking. Well, an unlearned lesson, it's very hard to say, oh, it's just my unlearned lesson. You know, it's a dynamic concept that immediately places responsibility upon you. If things are wearing you down or appear difficult or challenging or whatever they might be, yes, it's your unlearned lesson. It's definitely, it's your karma. It's your unlearned lesson. There is something in this that has been given to you to enable you to expand your awareness and to expand your consciousness. Anyway, I was so pleased because it's such a perfect answer to using karma to oppress us instead of to inspire and energize us. Well, in any case, so here we are with the little embryo, and it's manifesting a physical form. In fact, it's the jiva has chosen to enter that sperm and ovum united because the karmic conditions for it are just what it needs at that point. So there is this outward moving energy. There has to be, because the jiva is needing to manifest its physical body, because to live in the material world you have to have a physical body. Otherwise you're not in the material world if you don't have a physical body. And it's a very outward moving energy. And Master says something very intriguing here. He says one of the reasons it's so difficult for us to turn our attention away from the world that we see with the senses and back to our inner reality, which is really the origin point of this, is because we are conditioned from that whole effort to make our bodies into an outward direction, among other things. But the whole thrust of being born is an outward thrust of energy, and as things begin, so they continue. We just move on in that same way. And then we see this world. But Master explains to us that everything that we experience in the world, he uses the word, it's vicarious. It's not a direct experience where our eyes are perceiving, and our eyes then transfer that information to the brain. And the brain makes certain decisions about it. And the brain makes those decisions according to the predisposition of the ego, according to the karma. People can look at such different things and have such different experiences. I have a pet peeve about which I am becoming, I am approaching curmudgeonly, I think is actually the right word. When I was a child, I had an uncle who was curmudgeonly in exactly the same way. and I've begun to see myself reflected. I see myself now as a copy of him. And I have this deep aversion to loud music, especially loud, raucous, harsh, cacophonous music in either stores where I wish to shop or restaurants where I might wish to eat. Just today, I went someplace and I just made sure they understood that I was walking out because it was just so loud. It was impossible. But that's how my brain interprets what my ears receive. And the people running the restaurant, their ears receive it and their brain interprets it completely differently. We're not having a shared experience. We're both taking something from the outside and then we're interpreting it how we wish to interpret it. There's no unity about that perception. All masters' perception of the divine is a unified vision, but in the rest of our lives, we're fragmenting it all out, and it's all vicarious. We never really hold or own anything, but we imagine that we can, and we're always trying to do that. We're trying to own things, we're trying to own people, we're trying to own positions, fame, wealth, whatever it might be. But they have no power to actually uplift our consciousness. A number of years ago, we recarpeted the apartment we were living in, and if you're going to do something, you have to do it with full energy. So we put a lot of energy into deciding what color and what it would look like and all of this. And we wanted a rather unusual sort of golden color, which we couldn't find locally, and we ordered it from across the country. It was a gigantic big deal. Finally, there it is. The whole apartment, all the furniture is gone. The whole apartment is nothing but this new carpet. And I happened to be alone in the house. David wasn't home yet. And I'm looking at the carpet, the fruit of so many weeks of effort. And it was inert. That's the only word I can use. It just sat there. It couldn't tell jokes. It couldn't hold my hand. It couldn't comfort me when I was down. It couldn't enlighten me with its wisdom. It was absolutely inert. It had nothing, nothing. It had no life force. And all it was doing was reflecting back at me. I think Swamiji once talked about the fact that we look at things in the world and we're projecting our own life force toward them. I mean, we wouldn't be able to even see them if we didn't project our life force or hear them. What makes this world perceptible to us is that we're giving our life force to it. When you die or begin to die and you don't have any life force to give out anymore, the world literally begins to fade. You can't see it or feel it anymore. So we're projecting our own life force outward. And it's like the whole world is made out of shiny metal or tinfoil. And it reflects back to us. And depending on the predisposition of our own consciousness, depending on what unlearned lessons we have, is actually the way to think about it. Things reflect more or less brightly or more or less attractively to us. And the ones that look the most attractive we go after, and we imagine that we are looking at the source of the light because we are predisposed to look outward like this. Our senses have set it up that way, and our very incarnation has put us in that direction. Our energy, in other words, is out of our control. We're not choosing. We're just sucked in by Maya. We're making choices, yes, but they're not free choices. As someone said, people define free will as the freedom to do whatever you want. But what makes you want? That's where our freedom is gone, is that we want something and we think we're free because I get to go get what I want. But why did you want it in the first place? And what if what you want is unattainable? How free are you then? So we're always chasing after this light, which is very attractive to us. And that's the prana, that's the life force that we're dissipating. I mean, just think about where your life force goes on a regular basis. I have a particular aversion to mundane work. I mean, housework, and I like to cook, but I don't really like to cook. I mean, I like to cook on special occasions if I have nothing else to do. I enjoy the act of cooking. It was my job at Ananda for a number of years, and I enjoyed it in that sense. But the shopping, the shopping, the chopping, the cleaning, the endless, and Just for what? Just to keep your body going and the bodies of the people you love. And it's a nice service. I can talk about it. It's a nice service. But just to keep this body going there's just so much mundane work that has to be done. Well, that's one thing. But where is your consciousness when you're doing it? Are you allowing that mundane work? I'm complaining about it here, and I am complaining. I freely admit that I'm complaining. But at the other side, I try not to. I joke a little bit about it, because sometimes if you joke about these things, it eases the stress. Is prana under my control? Am I practicing pranayama, even in my mundane tasks, which is, where is my consciousness? And that's the question at all times. Where is my consciousness? Am I fearful? Am I filled with regret? Am I longing? Am I absent? Just letting my mind just be nowhere at all? You know, Master just talked about fillers, just doing things that literally just pass the time, just to pass the time. And we just let our life force just kind of dribble out. And suddenly we're at the end of another incarnation, and we're really not sure where it came from and where it went. One of my friends, when her mother was in the hospital, as it turned out, she never came out of the hospital. It was the last days of her life, or weeks. In a very sweet way, she said to her daughter, "I always thought when I got older I would get wiser," she said, "but I didn't." And there was a certain wisdom of humility in that remark. But it was also just a painful truth that energy has, all the prana has just gone in a circle for a whole nother incarnation, and we're finished. Maybe we learned a few lessons. Maybe we generated as much karma as we solved. Who knows? That's why it takes so long to realize God. But the actual religion of pranayama is that we gain mastery over that energy, and we break that habit of having our energy flow constantly outward. And the process is, as Master describes it in here, you know, first we withdraw the energy from the senses, then we center the energy in the spine, and then we magnetize that energy and make that flow strong until we can pull that energy upward. We center our attention at the spiritual eye, and then we go through the spiritual eye into Christ consciousness. Every ritual, every religious belief that is based on revelation and not just human opinion, that is always what we are doing. Because that is, as Master puts it so simply, that is the only place that divinity can be experienced. He said, and whether you go on pilgrimage, and whether you follow these principles, and whether you wear these symbols, and whether you stand up and call yourself this or that, unless and until we withdraw the energy from the senses, we focus the energy in the spine, we raise the energy up the spine to the spiritual eye, we are not following the highway to the infinite. We may be doing good work. We may be progressing ourselves even in a sense spiritually. For example, and because it's all directional, and as I was saying, the truth is one, but the paths to it are many. And what is forward for one person may be backwards for someone else. I met this man once who was, as it turned out, was a very rigid devotee of Christ. One of those, Jesus Christ is the only way, and there is no other choice but that one, and everybody else is going to hell. And he was not subtle in his expression of it. Many priests and clergy people hold the same point of view, but they've learned to be more gracious. This man had not learned to be gracious. But his background was that he had been a heroin addict, a very serious drug addict for a long time. And what saved him was his rigid belief in Jesus Christ. And it was progress for him. He wasn't ready yet for the infinite highway inside, but he was getting ready. He was pulling himself out of Maya in the way that he needed to do so. And it was working for him, and he could do that for a while, and then you can go beyond that. So it's not like everybody can understand this or follow it. For some people, it just such an idea just literally does not exist. We have many terrible examples. I mean, horrifying examples of what people are calling religion or belief in God that is simply demonic. It's just demonic action using a certain vocabulary, but it has nothing to do with true revelation and true religion. But many people, even who are sincerely religious, are not yet ready for the highway to the infinite. But for those of us who do understand it, there are several things that we need to understand. First of all, we have to realize what our true priority is. And it isn't looking good for other people, and it isn't sort of showing up at the right time in the right place, although no harm. The reason all the rites and rituals and habits and sanghas and pilgrimages and everything are put together, because all of that in its truest form helps strengthen the inner reality. When I was, it was in 1986, for the first time I traveled to India. And I was in fact, I was leading a pilgrimage to a place I'd never been. But my role in it was to talk about the teachings and the masters, which I did fully. I certainly had something to contribute in that way, even if I didn't know where I was geographically. Others were able to help with that. And because many aspects of Master's path, only the physical reality of them exists in India, such as Sri Yukteswar's ashram on the beach in Puri, and his Mahasamadhi Mandir, where his physical body is buried in the sands and there's a little temple built over it, or for Garpar Road in Calcutta, where Master lived with his family and had his small attic room, where he said this is where he found God, and the place in that same house where Babaji appeared to him and reassured him about taking the journey to America, and where Lahiri Mahashaya played out the Leela of his life in Varanasi. And these are very, very holy places geographically, and they are on the continent of India. So I had been on this path. This is 1986. I met Swami Kriyananda in 1969. So it wasn't quite 20 years that I had been on this path, but I'd been quite deeply engrossed for quite a long time. And then we went on pilgrimage. I'm talking about the benefit of outward activities, lest you misunderstand what I'm saying. So we went on pilgrimage, and we went to those places. My favorite among them, and it still is, I've been back many times, is the Mahasamadhi Mandir, where Sri Yukteswar is buried in the ashram in Puri. That's still my favorite place. It's just, as a practical matter, the way the ashram is run, you can't always get into the mandir. It's a little complicated. And I find it's always better to go on pilgrimage in India with a few other devotees, because there's so much confusion and noise that if you have a few other devotees with you, or a great many other devotees with you, there's a power that you can pull out of the ether that for most people is difficult to magnetize entirely on your own. Ananda in Italy and India and in America runs many pilgrimages to India and other countries. And so if anything I say inspires you to take such a journey, you can go through the internet and you can find those options, and I encourage you to take them. Now let me finish the thought here. As part of our Festival of Light, which we do every Sunday in our Ananda temples, we do an arati to the masters. We have the pictures of the 5 gurus on the Ananda altars, and the Festival of Light ritual includes a little bit of a lot of different things. And it includes an arati in which the light bearer, such a person as I, the priest, the designated priest, holds a candle, and the candle represents the individual spirit being offered into the infinite spirit. And on behalf of everyone in attendance, the light bearer does this. The first time after I had been in India, and we had meditated where Sri Yukteswar's body is buried, we had been to Master's house at 4 Garpar Road. At that time we were able to get inside of Lahiri Mahashaya's house in Varanasi. Now that's very difficult to do, but we were able to do that. We also went up into, at least within sight of the high Himalayas. We actually flew in a plane over the high Himalayas and saw some of the Himalayas from Nepal or Darjeeling. I don't recall where we were exactly. And when I was holding the candle in front of those masters, it was like I had a living experience of their vibrations that I knew had come because I had immersed myself in their vibrations. I'd been a place where their vibrations are very strong. And Master recommends pilgrimage. He says any place where the divine has manifested, he says the divine vibrations remain there forever. That's actually what he said. They remain there forever. And when you step back into that, you're really stepping into that vibration. And, you know, weeks later when we came home, and I'm looking at the picture of Lahiri Mahashaya, especially I became conscious of it because of the focused magnetism of the Festival of Light. I realized that my whole relationship with that guru was now different. But the vibration had come inside of me, because it's inside of us that we actually experience everything. And when we connect ourselves with divine vibrations, that is not vicarious. That is our own experience. That's why people will die for their faith. Because if you have really experienced it inside yourself, it doesn't really make any difference what people say or do. You can't repudiate it. It's the definition of who you are. And so in our spiritual life, we accumulate these direct experiences. I know it at different points in my spiritual life, certain decisions or directions came from inside of me. I'm not a person who, I won't say a whole lot more about that, but certain knowings just happened. And once that happens, with a certain quality to it, because I've had other ideas that seem like good ideas, and I would say, well, you know, maybe it's intuition, maybe it's not. But there's a qualitative perception that we have sometimes. And once you have that perception, there's nothing you can do about it. It's prana. It's your life force. And it has given you a reality, and everything else is vicarious. Other people's opinions, their threats, what they want, what they don't want, that's all outside of you. That's why when Jesus was purging his following of those who were not going to have the strength to carry on after he was crucified, because it was a very, very challenging time for those disciples. And many disciples were fleeing his company. And he asked Peter if Peter would also leave. And Peter responded, "Where could I go?" And there were many dimensions to that answer, but what he was also saying was, you are inside of me. My perception of you is not you. My perception of you is me. And where could I go? Wherever I would go, we would be together. How could I leave you? Why would I leave you? Merely because some of your teachings are a little confusing to me at this point? Master talks in this book also about, he uses this phrase, that the master does not come to draw people, a master does not come to draw people to himself. And I'd heard that phrase many times, but I understood it in a different way reading it, which is why I love to do these book study courses, because no matter how many times I've read these books, I always see something I didn't quite see. And it's so obvious that it's odd to me that I never really thought of it this way before. You see, Jesus came as an example, and the revelation that Jesus brought was the same revelation that Krishna brought. The kingdom of God is within. Be ye therefore perfect, even as our Father in heaven is perfect. Lift up your eyes, lift up your eyes, concentrate at the spiritual eye. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. When you start interpreting the teachings of Jesus with the understanding of the Bhagavad Gita and the understanding of Patanjali and the understanding of Sanatana Dharma, it's just one revelation. Paths may be many, but truth is always one. But because Jesus was a guru, and he had his disciples, and he brought himself forth as a true son of God, as a true representative of the infinite, but eating his body and drinking his blood, he was referring to Christ consciousness in Om, not to his physical self. But people were drawn to him. And in one sense, yes, of course they should be, because they were his disciples, or are his disciples now. And this is the many paths. If your individual divine relationship is with Christ or Krishna or Buddha or Yogananda or Mother Mary or Mother Teresa of Calcutta, whoever it is, Padre Pio, if that's your pathway, that's your pathway. They're all taking you to the same mountain, but you have to walk side by side with the God-given guide that your heart recognizes. But Jesus wasn't trying to show the world what he was. He was trying to show the world what is possible, and used himself as an example. But to imagine that the world needs to be Christian, therefore, and that everybody needs to follow Jesus is, well, a travesty of his teaching. I am the way, the truth, and the light. The I, Jesus meant at that time, was I, the infinite. I, one with the Christ consciousness. And he's right. The highway to the infinite is within. And this is the path that I have walked. And this is who I have become, and this is what you must do also. But to then personalize that is to completely miss the point. To be utterly devoted to Jesus as your Ishtadeva, your chosen form of divinity, or your guide to the infinite, is absolutely appropriate. But to imagine, therefore, that he came to make himself the one is a travesty. There's just no other word for it. It's an absolute travesty. They do not come to show how great they are. They do not come to draw people to themselves as limited beings. The they want us to see is the shared infinity. Everything about the misunderstanding of Jesus is the pronoun I. When Jesus said I, what did he refer to? Those of us who are ego-bound, where the I is identified with the physical body, that's what we assume he meant. There's a man standing in front of you. He says I. They think he means his physical body. But the man standing in front of you is not having a vicarious experience. He's having a direct experience. His energy is withdrawn from the senses. It's centered in the spine. It's raised up to the spiritual eye. The spiritual eye and the medulla are the opposite poles, Master said, of the same chakra. It's fascinating. This is our individuality. And either we are ego-bound, which is the infinite, has identified itself with the ephemeral, with the limited body, that's ego, or the individuality, the jiva, the infinite, has identified itself with the infinite and still functions as a bubble in the sea. but identifies itself with the whole sea. And whenever Jesus said I, he meant the ocean of infinity, in which the little recognizable bubble called Jesus floated. But the bubble didn't think of itself as a separate reality. I mean, imagine for a moment, or think of it as a wave. A wave is easier to think about. I mean, a wave rises in the ocean. But does that wave ever cease to be anything but the ocean? I mean, it may stand for an instant of time, seemingly separated. But even where did any of it come from? It's always the ocean. It can never be defined except as the ocean having taken this particular form. But we get in the habit of looking and moving outward, and we just forget what prana is and where it came from, what to speak of having any control over it. And pranayama will give you salvation. And salvation is freedom from the compelling reality of the ephemeral world. Freedom from all of the things that bind us, that remain unlearned lessons, imagined fulfillments, imagined transgressions, just a losing connection with the true prana. That's why Jesus could participate completely in this world as he did, but his awareness was always surrendered. When he was being arrested and crucified, he said, even now, my Father could send legions of angels. In other words, you have the impression that I am under your power, but I am not. And Master often just talked about he was as aware of the astral world as he was of the physical world. And he talked about, if you could see this world as I see it, if you could see yourselves as I see you, you would realize that you are nothing but light, just beautiful light. He's having a direct experience of the reality of this world. He's not looking at it vicariously. He's seeing it as a manifestation of divine life force. We're all the ocean. He can also see the various waves, but he never loses connection with the whole ocean. This is the highway to the infinite. Kriya Yoga per se, the technique of Kriya and the practice of Kriya is a simple method that cooperates with the way we are made. This was the last chapter we did, the need for yoga, that cooperates with the way we are made and helps us to disconnect from the senses, draw the energy into the spine, magnetize the spine, lift the energy upward, concentrate at the spiritual eye. And it doesn't matter whether your devotion, as I was saying, it doesn't matter to what you are devoted. The Divine Mother, a particular form, impersonal light, doesn't matter to what you are devoted. This is the way to empower, to give actual experience to your devotion. Master tells the extremely touching tale of a sincere devotee of God that Master met, who deeply loved God and was deeply dedicated to communion with God. But he didn't have any techniques. He didn't understand how to redirect the energy, how to cooperate with the way the energy is. And Master tried to explain to him that if he could learn and practice Kriya, he would achieve what he was trying to achieve. And the man at first resisted Master, thinking, I have to be loyal to my path. One presumes that he was talking to some Christian monk, because in America that would be the most likely person that he would meet. A Christian monk, deeply devoted. How can I take initiation and learn a yoga technique from a Hindu guru? I have to be loyal to my path. But Master finally was able to explain to him. He said, you're like a man who's been in a room for the last 20 years, and you keep trying to get out through the wall. He said, I can just open the door and show you where you're trying to go. So finally, Master persuaded him. And he took Kriya and learned it and practiced it. And Master said he came back in 1 week, and he'd had the experience of God that he'd been seeking with all his heart for 2 decades. because it just taught him how to turn the energy in the right direction. You see, and that's how, in a more advanced age than the age we're living in, but the foundation for that advancement and for that much to be desired harmony of spirit, which is where the ascending age is taking us. This is where self-realization, and it seemingly Master himself, as the what I mean to say is this expression of self-realization, seemingly has been sent for this particular purpose, because it gives thoughtful, sensitive people a way to be more than just polite in the face of other ways of belief. Because if we can all understand that what we're all doing, I mean, I went to Varanasi and stood in the courtyard of Lahiri Mahashaya's house and was able to contemplate his mission and feel his energy in that place, and came home with a much more profound ability to commune with that guru than I had before. But someone who's devoted to Jesus is really not going to be interested in going to Varanasi. He'll go to Jerusalem or just go within his own meditation room. But let's say he goes to Jerusalem, and he'll go to the places where Jesus goes and have within himself his own experience of the living power and presence of Jesus, which will enable him to commune more deeply with Jesus. And what that will enable that devotee to do is to pull his energy in from the senses, to gather it in the center of his own being, to magnetize that energy and to raise it up, and to feel the power and the presence of God within himself at the spiritual eye. And we'll look at each other. We might not even speak the same language, and our way of traveling the path may appear to be different, but we'll recognize each other. Master tells a story of arriving at a certain monastery, I believe in the Midwest of the United States. I may have the details wrong, but that's what I recall. And there was an abbot in that monastery that Master had heard about, who was a great saint. And when Master arrived in his Hindu garb, with his Indian garb with his long hair, others of the more narrow-minded inhabitants were disinclined to let him meet the abbot. But as soon as the abbot and Master saw each other, they immediately recognized kindred spirits, because they knew that the outward garb they were wearing was just that outward movement of energy, but for both of them, their true self was the pranayama, the control of the life force, and the control of the life force was the same. And it brought them out of their differences and into their unity. That's why Master writes in Autobiography of a Yogi that the universal practice of Kriya Yoga, the meditation and the actual experience of our individual relationship with God, will awaken us to that same divinity in everyone. And when we really know that, then all hostilities will cease. Hostilities will be impossible, because we will no longer see differences. We will only see that unity. These days, when this is being recorded, 2014, it's a very tumultuous world we're living in. Not as tumultuous as I believe it will become. The Master has made predictions that have not yet been fulfilled, of violence and confusion. And at this particular time in the Middle East, there's a particularly worrisome expression of darkness, in which it's almost as if the collected dissonance and greed and disharmony of the whole planet has begun to take physical form through groups of people who are expressing their fanaticism in a more barbaric way than we've seen up until this point. But it's simply the next step of where the planet has been going. Naturally, one is concerned about such things. And naturally, one has a desire, a question, what can I do? Well, Master actually has given us the answer right in Autobiography of a Yogi, which is the more deeply each of us as individuals and all of us as brothers and sisters on the spiritual path, and all of us as sincere seekers of eternal inward truth, the more deeply we live it, the more deeply we practice it, the more deeply we radiate, then one by one. That uplifted power is also a magnetism on the planet. And it is seemingly necessary. The karma of the planet seems quite bent on destruction. These things are in the hands of God, and God seems to have his reasons. But the salvation of every individual is completely within his own potential mastery, as it has always been. Whether one lives or dies, whether one suffers or doesn't suffer, is an independent question from whether or not one uses the incarnation to practice pranayama, to gain control of the life force. And very often, unlearned lessons for sincere devotees are to be given immense challenges to their capacity to practice pranayama, which is to control the life force, keep the energy internalized, magnetized, and raised to the spiritual eye, no matter what. And none of us seek what we would perceive as suffering. But at a certain point on the spiritual path, one seeks only to do what will draw you closer to God. And if it draws you closer to God, then what is there to fear? Toward the end of his life, Swami Kriyananda had a dream at which he was being burned at the stake. And he enjoyed telling us about that dream, and it was a very profound and interesting dream. He was being burned at the stake by his enemies, and they were having dinner in this big hall, and they were having dinner on one side of the room, and he was being burned at the stake on the other. And he told the story so sweetly, because he said even in the dream, even though a dream is very real, he was quite calm about it. Well, if it's my fate to be burned at the stake, God is in charge, whatever it might be. And he just watched himself be completely even-minded about it. And when the idea of physical pain entered his thinking, he thought, well, it will last briefly and then it'll be past. And just before the flames really began to consume him, his friends arrived on the scene and rescued him, so in fact he wasn't burned at the stake. But Swami told the story in such a way that was so really thrilling to contemplate, because he said when he was going to die by being burned, when he was saved from dying and being burned, he said his consciousness was just the same. Pranayam be thou thy religion. Pranayam will give you salvation. It will save you from everything other. It will separate you from everything other than your own divinity. The inward highway to the infinite. This is the path of self-realization. God bless you.